I'm a cat living in the cemetery, and I've adopted Serafina, a proud emblem breed. She doesn't respond to my flirting or stroke me. From time to time, she says to me with a cold expression, "I'm not going to adopt you." I wonder. Have you overcome human addiction? I was originally a ragdoll cat living in the cemetery. Bad news, it seems that the territory leader, have been captured, and the news is even worse as I'm crammed with more than a dozen cats in a narrow cage. It's hot and crowded here. I can't even move a paw in front of the cage. There's a middle-aged pot-bellied man sharpening his knife. The sharp sound the knife makes as it rubs against the stone makes me shiver. The air is impregnated with the smell of blood, and I have no appetite at all. I even feel like vomiting. The fat orange cat next to me lets out a heart-rending howl. "Let me out! Let me out!" The tiger-striped cat stepping on my tail behind keeps complaining, "When I get out, I'll kill you." And the blue cat with half its body on top of me doesn't stop crying, "Where's my master? Why doesn't he come to get me?" I keep consoling myself, thinking that Serafina must have noticed that I'm gone, that the unease in my heart deepens in this environment. The burly man seems to have finished sharpening the knife. He approaches the cage door with the knife in his hand with a crack. His thick hand opens the cage door. I and the other cats instinctively retreat to the corner, just hoping not to be grabbed. Some of the bolder cats growl a warning. The man ignores them and grabs me with one hand. I try to resist by clinging to the cage, but he pulls me out of the cage. On his chubby face, there's only indifference. The man says, "You're big, so I'll start with you." I feel a tearing pain in my neck that makes me howl, and I move my paws desperately. Without further ado, he takes me towards an iron bucket. Even before getting close, I can smell an acidic and bitter smell coming from the bucket. It's the smell of the suffering of other cats. The man presses the tip of the newly sharp and knife against my throat while murmuring, "Don't blame me. Anyway, street life is a suffering, consider it a liberation." Saying this, he raises the sharp blade and presses it towards me. "No, I've been captured. I can't die. If I'm lost, Serafina will worry. She'll surely look for me." My body's instinctive reaction makes me unleash superhuman strength. At a moment when the man is distracted, I scratch his arm hard. This is the first time in my life that I've attacked a human. This scratch makes the man complain of pain, and I'm glad to have escaped a serious danger. But in the next instant, the cold knife pierces my body, and I fall heavily onto the hard cement floor. Serafina is a human who isn't interested in anything. She has a loose ponytail, and always wears a black suit overcoat. On her delicate melon-shaped face, there are a pair of clear but dull eyes. What she says most is, "It's enough to be alive, dying is also okay." Before I met Serafina, I was a street cat having a hard time. Although, as a ragdoll cat, I'm good at flirting and being cute, I'm not good at finding food, fighting, or defending my territory. It's normal for me to be chased around. Even those collared dogs have fun chasing me until they see me running up and down everywhere. The neighboring tiger-striped cat, after beating me up, said to me, "You're so big, but you're useless." At that time I could only hide in the foliage, trembling. The day I met Serafina, I hadn't managed to steal the skewer of meat from the trash can. I was hiding in a bush and watched as the other cats took away the delicious skewer of meat. The cold, accompanied by the rain, overtook me, and my stomach crumbled. It seemed to hurt. Just then, Serafina stopped in front of the bush where I was hiding, looking into my eyes. She said with her thin lips, "What a stupid cat, it can't even steal its own food." Instinctively, I tried to back away. After all, the last time I flirted with a human to beg for food, I only received a cruel kick. I had just lifted my claw when she placed a can of chicken in front of me. I hadn't eaten for 2 days, and the aroma went straight to my brain. I pounced on the can and devoured it greedily. To avoid attracting the attention of other cats, I swallowed it whole. I thought Serafina would have left, but when I raised my head, I realized that she was still squatting, looking at me. She held a black umbrella over me, and her shoulder was already wet. To show my gratitude, I rubbed my head against her ankle. I thought she would stroke my head, like other kind humans. But she didn't. She stood up and was about to leave. I got nervous and started meowing, running after her. How can she be so impolite? I've been so friendly. Why doesn't she respond to me? Today, this cat has to know why she doesn't respond to my advances along the way. She keeps saying something, "Don't follow me. I can't adopt you. Several attempts to rub against her ankle are quickly avoided by her. This only increases my desire to win. There are no two-legged creatures this cat can't get close to. I follow her for a very long time, until I feel that the food in my stomach has been digested. Serafina stops in front of a black iron gate and says to me, "We've reached the cemetery. Don't follow me." Seeing that she stops, I take the opportunity and rub my body against her calf. At that moment, I perceived a jasmine aroma on Serafina. Serafina took a few steps back, and her tone became a bit irritated. I thought with satisfaction that I had won, that I had finally achieved my goal. "Serafina, aren't you admitting defeat in this?" A man coming out of the main door started stroking my head, with a deep and powerful voice. He was wearing the same business suit as Serafina. I guessed that Serafina had brought me to her territory. Serafina said, "Nathaniel, if you like it, take it home and take care of it." Nathaniel picked me up with a smile and continued stroking my head. "I'm always out visiting clients. How can I take care of it?" I was annoyed that he messed up my fur and protested with a meow. Serafina pursed her lips. "Well, leave it here sooner or later. It will leave." At that moment, an old man in a security uniform came out of the security booth. He had gray hair but a straight back. "Do we have a new visitor in our cemetery?" Nathaniel replied, "Yes, a little cat." The old man came closer and looked at me, surprised. "This cat is very big. It seems bigger than the common ones." Before he finished speaking, his rough hand landed on my back, and he said with a smile, "What a beautiful cat." I stretched out my neck and rubbed against his hand, responding to his caress. Seeing this, Nathaniel quickly asked, "Old man, why don't you take it home and take care of it? Besides, it could accompany you at night in the security booth." The old man waved his hand. "At my age, it's not known who will go first, me or it." Then the old man looked at Serafina, who was beside him. "Serafina, why don't you take care of it? After all, you're here in the cemetery all the time. It could amuse you." Hearing this, Serafina's expression tensed, and her dull eyes blinked. "What a nuisance. I don't want it to stick to me." And as if she was running away from something, she ran through the door in front of her. The old man gently stroked my chin. "Little cat. Don't be angry with her. She's a very unfortunate person." I felt so good with the chin stroking that I couldn't help but purr. Finally, having fulfilled my sigh, Nathaniel took me inside the cemetery. The old man and Nathaniel made a nest for me with a cardboard box. I was happy, and kicked it a little. "Not bad. It has a cushion. I like it," Nathaniel said with a tone of regret. "I feel guilty for only giving it a cardboard box. I'll order a cat nest online right away." The old man quickly said, "Pass it a brush. Its fur is so long and it's all tangled." They prepared cat food for me in a plastic plate, and clean water. It was something I hadn't enjoyed for a long time. There were no other cats to fight with me. Without thinking much, I bent down and started drinking eagerly. How delicious the water was without the smell of mud. The two of them started arguing, each with their own opinion. After drinking, I got up and began to observe my new territory. In the distance, on the green mountain, there was a series of standing tombstones, covering the entire mountain, silent and solitary. Nearby, in the courtyard, there were some buildings, with few people, quiet and simple. It seemed that this place wasn't such a bad territory from now on. These two-legged beings will be under my protection. After integrating into the life in the cemetery, I found that Nathaniel wasn't often in the cemetery. The old man often forgot to feed me cat food, and I would stand in front of the security booth, hungry, mewing. And the sound of the opera coming from the mobile phone in the security booth covered my mew. Finally, it was Serafina who came over because of the noise and, with a sigh, gave me more food and water. On the other side of the cemetery wall, the old man in the security booth called it the funeral home. Whenever Nathaniel came back from outside, he would go straight there, and then everyone in the cemetery would start working. The schedule wasn't fixed. It could be during the day or at night. When I couldn't sleep, I would sneak over to the neighboring funeral home to take a look. There were a lot of unfamiliar people gathered there. Some were crying in pain, others were holding back and not saying anything. All of them had a sour and bitter smell. I didn't like that unpleasant smell. There I saw an unfamiliar Serafina. The others called her the funeral beautician. Half of her face was covered with a mask, and she silently watched the others while they were crying or showing emotions. When the unfamiliar people left, Serafina would pick up a small black box and enter a room with a mysterious iron door. I couldn't follow her, the heavy iron or stopped me. I don't know what it was that a cat wasn't allowed to see. Besides, I found that everyone liked to take their mobile phones to the bathroom and they took a long time to come out. I had to spend a lot of time watching out for them. Especially Nathaniel. I often lost my patience and scratched the door, and he would come out muttering, adjusting his pants. In the afternoon, it was the time when humans went out to look for food while I was patrolling my territory as usual. I happened to meet Serafina coming out of the dormitory. I rubbed against her enthusiastically, as a greeting from the boss this time. Serafina didn't run away. She just frowned and made a sound of disgust. She walked towards a place called the dining hall. According to my observations, the aroma of food could be smelled there. Shortly after, Nathaniel also came in from outside. Thingy sat down with a plate the same as Serafina's. Suddenly, heading to me, Serafina asked, "Are you going to leave the cat here?" Nathaniel was puzzled for a moment. "Well, I'm afraid the cat will end up in the wrong hands, so it's better." Serafina asked, "Is it possible that it got lost?" Nathaniel picked up his chopsticks and analyzed. "I think it's unlikely. But cat's fur is all tangled. If they were really worried about finding it, how could they let it wander around for so long?" Serafina frowned. "That's just your assumption. I'm going to post online to find its owner." Nathaniel muttered in complaint. "You weren't interested in it before. Why are you so eager to get rid of it?" Serafina, as if she hadn't heard his words, picked up the empty plate and said, "I finished eating. I have another client who needs to be made up. So I'm leaving." Nathaniel called her several times. But Serafina didn't turn her head. Nathaniel complained irritably. "She's so fussy." When spring came that year, for a few days, there were an excessive number of strangers in the cemetery. The people in the cemetery said it was the Qingming festival, the busiest time of the year. And my sunbathing time was always being interrupted. From time to time, some passing stranger would stroke me twice. I couldn't sleep well. And it was really driving me crazy. Serafina became even busier. Even if she didn't go to the funeral home, she would stay and keep watch in the cemetery. When they woke me up, I would go to find Serafina. I would play with the decorations in her ponytail for a while, and then sharpen my claws on her pants. Serafina still didn't want to talk to me. But she could only sit there without moving and couldn't get away. If I made her angry, she would just wave her arms angrily to push me away, but when it was time to eat, she still gave me food with a sour face. It was one of the pleasures I had discovered recently. The day the cemetery became quiet again, however, Serafina did something unusual. She didn't fill my food plate, nor change the water. Until the sun set, the food plate was still empty. Finally, the sound of my stomach forced me to sneak into the residential building to find Serafina. Serafina's dormitory was in the last room on the second floor. It was easy to find by going up the stairs. Sometimes, when Serafina hadn't come back from going out, I would sit at the door waiting for her to feed me. And when she came back, she usually gave me a can of food. But today, when I jumped to the window, I saw Serafina in bed. But she didn't respond even when I called her loudly. I was very worried. I started scratching the window and the door desperately, and my claws scraped the glass, making a sharp scratch sound. Even I felt my first and on end. But Serafina in bed showed no sign of movement. I jumped up and down on the windowsill, but couldn't think of a solution. Suddenly, I thought that I couldn't get through the door, but maybe someone could. I rushed to the security booth. Fortunately, having fulfilled Leon's Susher. Today the window of the security booth wasn't locked, so I sneaked in through the window. The old guard was sitting with his eyes closed, leaning back in the chair, listening to the opera. And the owl from me startled him so much that he jumped up. He looked around nervously and relaxed when he saw me. "It's you." I thought it was the boss. To get him to follow me, I started meowing non-stop. The old guard frowned and looked at me for a while. And finally, he slapped his leg. "I understand. Are you hungry?" He said this while filling my food plate with a bag of cat food. At that moment, I wasn't concerned about eating. I rubbed against his pants and looked in the direction of the residential building. The old man was puzzled. "Why don't you eat? There's food here." He said this and hugged me, shoving my head into the food plate physically. My mouth was suddenly filled with food without warning. Man, I'm really speechless. When the old man saw me call him again, he asked worriedly, "What do you want?" little cat? Seeing that he didn't understand, I tried to pull his pants with my mouth. This surely should have made him understand my intention. The old man brightened up. Little cat. You want to play with me? He said this and took out a stick with a pom-pom. I closed my eyes in despair. It was so hard to communicate. How could he suddenly want to play with me? So I patiently played with him for a while. And then tried to lead us towards the residential building. This was the best idea I could come up with all my brain. I had already played with him, surely he was willing to follow me now. But, to my surprise, when the old man saw me walking away, he got up and said, "Have you finished playing, little cat? And I'm also going back to my guard post." Seeing him leaving, I meowed loudly again to call him back. How could he be so stubborn? After playing with him for so long, couldn't he come and take a look? I was very angry, and there would be serious consequences tonight. I'll scratch the doormat at the entrance of his bedroom. Imagine my surprise when the old man actually turned his head, crouched down with a resigned expression, and soothed me. "Don't be angry. I have to go on duty." Since the sound could attract his attention, I stood on the steps of the residential building and started meowing at the top of my lungs. Meow meow. The old man got worried and quickly came over. "Shh. Don't meow so loudly." I ignored his warning and ran towards the second floor. Seeing that the old man was following me, I was delighted and ran towards Serafina's dormitory door and started scratching it. Then he finally seemed to understand what I meant. "What's wrong? Is something not right?" The old man peeked through the window into the room and murmured, "What's going on? Hasn't she woken up yet?" After a while, he took out his phone and dialed a number. The sound of ring 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 could be heard. The sound lasted until the end without any change. The old man exclaimed in a low voice, "Oh no, no. I think something bad has happened." He didn't care that I was on the windowsill. He rushed downstairs in a hurry. After waiting for a while, the old man quickly took out a cane and opened the door. I followed the old man's steps and we ran towards Serafina's bed. Unable to wait, I jumped onto her and sniffed. Something was wrong. I could clearly feel that Serafina's temperature was higher at the tip of my nose. And the jasmine aroma on her body had also weakened. I tried to calm her down as my mother used to do to me, licking her forehead with my tongue, hoping she would wake up soon. The old gentleman touched Serafina's forehead and then turned around and rushed out after all this commotion. I also felt very tired, so I lay down beside Serafina's feet to rest. Serafina will be okay. I just need to be with her. I lean on Serafina to breathe it. It's been too long since I've exerted myself so much. And my body seems unable to bear it. I feel that I don't have the same energy as before. It wasn't long before sleep invaded my mind, and I fell asleep without realizing it. In my confusion, I heard the gentleman say, "I found you because he led me here." Immediately after, the aroma of jasmine mixed with a bitter taste filled my nostrils. It seems that Serafina patted me on the head and said hoarsely, "Thank you." Suddenly, the gentleman asked, "It seems she really likes you. Why don't you adopt him? You can keep him in the yard." Serafina remained silent. The gentleman sighed and said, "At your age, being afraid to build new relationships will make you miss many precious things. Serafina's bed is soft and fragrant." I turned around and felt safe enough to show my belly instantly. Serafina shouted, "Ah! This is the newly changed bed sheet. You have mud on your feet." But in the end, she didn't kick me out of the bed even though she knew I was pretending to sleep. I thought Serafina had already accepted me in her dormitory, but surprisingly, the next day, her bedroom door was locked. And no matter how much I scratched the door, she didn't want to open it. Ah, these two-legged creatures. Suddenly, Nathaniel put a black collar around my neck. He explained, on the way back, the nearby villagers said that recently there are people stealing cats. This collar has a tracking function, so don't worry about losing it. I hated it very much and tried to tear it off several times. But without success. Nathaniel proposed, "Since the kitten is a permanent employee of the cemetery, let's give him a name." Serafina, who hadn't said anything until now, said two words, "Tuna." Nathaniel said, "Huh?" Serafina explained, "He loves canned tuna. And that's why he followed us, because of a can of tuna." Nathaniel pursed his lips and said, "You named him well done. Do it again." I was eager to eat, so I kicked and jumped out of Nathaniel's arms, running towards my food bowl. And indeed, When Serafina came back, there was tuna in my bowl. After eating heartily, Nathaniel stroked my head with a smile and said, "Handsome, from now on you'll be called Handsome." Serafina has changed now. She voluntarily takes out the cat ball toy to play with me. And when I rub against her, she strokes my head. I understand that Serafina has accepted me as her owner. The only problem is that her door is always closed, but I'm convinced that sooner or later I'll get in. A brave cat isn't afraid of difficulties. Life in the cemetery is relaxing and happy. In the morning, there's fresh food. And then I lie on the windowsill soaking up the sun until I wake up naturally. At night, I exert myself a bit more and play with Serafina or the old gentleman with the cat ball toy as exercise when summer comes. The windowsill is no longer my first choice for sunbathing. Instead, I hide in the foliage of the orchard to avoid the heat. One day, while I was taking a nap, I was woken up by a man's rough and unpleasant shouting. He stormed into the cemetery, and upon seeing Serafina, he hurled a series of insults at her. "Serafina, your mother is bedridden, and you don't go home. What are you doing in this creepy place? Are you waiting for your parents to die before you go back?" The old gentleman's thick and powerful voice attracts many people who come over to watch. Since there's an argument in my territory, I quickly come out of the foliage where I was resting to see what's going on. Serafina has a gloomy expression and her tone of voice is colder than ever. "You didn't raise me for a single day. You're not my parents." The man's face turns red with anger. He raises his hand and, without further ado, slaps Serafina. The sharp smack sound makes the crowd fall silent for a moment. Serafina covers her face with her hand without saying anything, staring fixedly at the man in front of her. The man has tense veins and a scared expression. "Back then, I shouldn't have given you life. It would have been easier to squeeze your neck." Seeing Serafina being mistreated, I shouted insults at the man. All the bad wishes I could imagine in my life. "You'll go out and never catch anything. There will be no meat in every meal you have." A man looks down and sees me. Growls, "Where did you come from? You damned cat? Get out of here." And he says this while raising his foot, as if he's going to kick me. This posture reminds me of the time when a man kicked me when I was a stray cat. And my body involuntarily shrinks and I step back. But Serafina takes a big step and steps between the man and me. "This time I'll go, but I want to transfer the ownership of my uncle's house to me." Hearing this, the man raises his hand again to hit Serafina. The old doorman, seeing that the situation is getting dangerous, quickly comes over. "Hey! This is a cemetery, don't cause trouble. If you wake the dead, you'll have bad luck and lose money." Hearing this, the man hesitates for a moment. And the hand he had raised slowly lowers. Then he lowers his voice and says in a threatening tone, "Come with me right now and go take care of your mother." I look at him with hatred, and closely follow him. Serafina enters the dormitory covering her face without saying anything, while the threatening man waits outside. The old gentleman strokes my head and says gently, "Don't worry, everything will be okay." Soon after, Serafina left with an old gentleman, carrying a black backpack. Then, whatever was I? She didn't come back for many days. I waited day after day outside the cemetery. But it wasn't because I missed her too much, nor was it because I didn't have fresh food without her. How tiresome the days without Serafina are. Serafina has been away for far too long. And a feeling of unease has started to linger over me. The smell that was unique to Serafina around a cemetery was getting weaker and weaker. Where was she? I had to spend more and more time waiting at the entrance of the cemetery. Sometimes, when I met Nathaniel, he would stroke my head and say, "Don't worry. She's gone home." I don't know how many times the sun had risen and set. But finally I decided to go and look for her in more distant places, following the dirt road that led out of the cemetery entrance. I came across free-roaming cats in a nearby village. They were very alert to me, a stranger, and it was difficult to get close to them, let alone talk to them. I had to walk through most of the village until I found a friendly, chubby orange cat. He came up to me, wagging his tail, and I asked him if he had seen Serafina. The orange cat sat on a branch, with his eyes half closed. "And what's in it for me to tell you?" Finally, having fulfilled my desire, with a heavy heart, I promised to bring him delicious canned food. Then, the cat opened its eyes and said slowly, "I don't know, I haven't seen her." I was so angry, and I almost climbed up the tree to fight with him how the times have changed, and how cats have degenerated. The autumn rain came down heavily. It had been sunny just a moment ago. But suddenly a strong wind blew up the raindrops, as big as grains, splashed onto the ground with a sloshing sound. I quickly took shelter under a rickety straw awning, but there was another cat in the narrow awning. It was the fat orange cat from the tree. I was annoyed and didn't want to talk to him. The rain lasted a long time and didn't stop even when night fell. The orange cat talked to me. "Hey, why aren't you at the two-legged creature's house being a pet, and you're out here?" I turned to the other side and ignored him, but the orange cat became more interested. "I rarely see cats like you. Tell me. Where are you from?" I gritted out 2 words. "From the cemetery." The orange cat looked at me and spat out a mocking sound. "Did you lose the two-legged creatures who adopted you? How stupid you are." I was about to get angry, but the orange cat said slowly, "I haven't seen the two-legged creatures you mentioned, but tonight the street cats in the village are going to gather. The power of the cat network is very great. Maybe someone there knows something about what you want to know." My eyes lit up and I quickly asked, "Brother Orange, you're so kind, can you take me?" As he said, there were a dozen cats, big and small, gathered in the dense jungle outside the village. In the darkness, their shiny eyes looked at me like lanterns. I seemed like a stranger who had wandered in here, and unconsciously, to hide my fear, I showed my large body. A black cat asked, "Orange, why did you bring this monster?" The orange cat walked over slowly. "This is the new one from the cemetery." The black cat circled around me and said in disgust, "It looks big, but it's useless." I shrank uncomfortably, surprised that they had seen through me so quickly. The orange cat explained to me, "Most of the cats here are from the village and they're all good hunters. It's no wonder they look down on you." I looked around and saw that most of the cats here had strong limbs and sleek fur. But I wasn't the only one who seemed out of place. The orange cat was too. There was hardly any cat as fat as him. Seeing me looking at him, the orange cat turned away in embarrassment. "The one who cleans my litter box gives me a lot to eat, and I just don't want to hurt his feelings." A cat next to him laughed, "Orange, the one who cleans your litter box is raising you like a pig." Before I could ask about Serafina, the strong striped cat who was the leader issued a warning. "Bad news. The kidnappers are coming." The moment he said that, the cats that were grooming each other next to me scattered. Even the fat orange cat next to me ran away. I didn't have time to react to what was happening when a huge net covered me. The cat's sixth sense told me this was no good. I tried to jump out, but the net held me tightly and I couldn't escape. When I ran out of strength and couldn't get out, a strong hand grabbed me by the scruff and lifted me up. I struggled with all my might to break free, but the pain in the scruff made me afraid to pull too hard. In the blink of an eye, I was put into a wire cage. Click. The only exit was locked with a key. I jumped from one side to the other trying to find a new way out, but it was all in vain. The cage was airtight and very sturdy. Just when I was about to give up and rest a little, a huge ball of orange fur fell on me. I was stunned, and after a while, I saw that it was the fat, orange cat. The orange cat lay in the cage, panting non-stop. Seeing him in such a mess, I couldn't help laughing. I couldn't hold back my laughter and it burst out. The orange cat looked at me angrily and said, panting, "What? Is it so strange that a fat cat can't run fast?" I nodded and said, "Yes. Of course." One by one, a dozen cats were put into the cage, including the leader. The striped cat, the fat orange cat, was surprised. "Boss, you too?" The leader, the striped cat, bared his teeth angrily. "It's Blackie's fault. If it weren't for me helping him distract their attention, not even simple two-legged creatures could have caught me." As more and more cats piled up in the cage, I, at the bottom, was gradually running out of breath. Just then, the cage was loaded onto a truck. Seeing that we were getting farther and farther away from the village, the cats around me let out cries of pain. I asked the fat orange cat, "Where are we going?" The fat orange cat sighed and replied, "Surely not to any good place." When the tarpaulin of the truck's trunk was lifted, I was breathless. There were dozens or even hundreds of cages like ours in the truck, and each one was full of our fellow cats as scared and helpless as us. After the cage was put in the trunk, everything turned pitch black. My sharp ears amplified the cries of the surroundings even more. "Let me go. I want to go back. Damn two-legged creatures. The owner won't let you get away with this. I'm so hungry, I want to eat dry cat food. In that noisy environment, the truck started moving. Swaying. I didn't know where the truck was going. But I realized that I was getting farther and farther away from the cemetery. I don't know how long the truck drove. It seemed like I had fallen asleep and woken up many times. Hunger was the least of my problems. I was so thirsty that I thought I could drink an entire river. The feeling of thirst was burning my insides like a fire. And there was always a strange discomfort. Finally, the truck stopped and our cage was unloaded. The cage was quickly carried by a fat, unknown man behind a sliding door, and I didn't realize that the collar around my neck, due to my struggle in the cage, had come off my neck and was left only in the truck. I and a dozen cats were placed in a small, dark room, filled with the smell of the blood of our fellow cats. And the man sat down on one side and started sharpening a knife with a stone. Unfortunately, I was the first cat chosen. The moment the tip of the knife entered my body, I also scratched the man hard, and he involuntarily dropped the knife. My body fell heavily to the ground and a stream of blood flowed from the wound. I heard the man scream in pain, "Damn animal. I'll kill you today." The pain made me let out an involuntary moan. Everything in front of my eyes was red, and the warm blood mixed with the blood-stained dirt on the ground. There was only one thought in my mind: I won't be able to wait for Serafina. In the cage behind, many cats shouted at me. Well done. Even the fat orange cat, rarely, praised me. Silly but brave, you're very courageous. But I didn't even have the strength to turn my head, and the scene in front of my eyes was getting darker. Even my always sharp ears seemed to have become dull. The only thing I was thinking was whether Serafina and the others would worry if I died here. But I couldn't hold on any longer before everything turned completely black. I saw the man lift the knife and come towards me again. Vaguely, I smelled a faint jasmine aroma again, and I heard a shout that I almost missed. Stop! I'll report you for illegal killing. After completely sinking into darkness, I had a very long dream. In the dream, I was a newly born kitten. And a warm hand separated me from my mother's embrace. The person holding me said, "I'm your new mom now, you'll live in my house." She had long, loose hair. And on her beautiful face, her eyes were full of tenderness. I remembered her. Her name was Juliet. She had shared many years with me. She fed me delicious food, played with me, and named me Luna. She would hug me, smiling, and rub her whole face against my belly, saying, "My dear Luna, Mom is here. Come and let me give you a kiss." She would also stroke my head and say, "Who couldn't love my little Luna?" But that same Juliet later put me in a bag and left me in the grass. She said coldly, "Don't come back and don't give me trouble." I got up to chase her, but Juliet got into a car and quickly disappeared. Later, I tried my best to secretly see her again. And I didn't expect there to be a Persian cat similar to me, and it was also named Luna. Juliet held it in her arms and said, "My dear Luna, come and let me give you a kiss." Up to this point in the dream, I suddenly opened my eyes. I heard an unknown voice. "The little one is out of danger now, but the chronic renal insufficiency is irreversible. And how much longer she lives depends on God's will." Ah, the term chronic renal insufficiency. I had heard on the day Juliet left me to purse and rest, and White continued. This disease requires a lot of care to manage. Then, whatever was I heard Serafina sobbing, I'm sorry. It's my fault for not accepting you before." It seemed to be Serafina's voice with difficulty. I lifted my head and found myself looking into Serafina's eyes, red from crying. In my memory, it was the first time I saw Serafina with such an expression. She was exuding a bitter and acidic smell again. I didn't like it. I wanted to get up to comfort Serafina, but my body wouldn't obey at all. My whole body was weak, as if on the verge of collapse. And I felt pain all over. Finally, I could only let out a weak meow. Serafina noticed that I had woken up, and the tears in her eyes poured down like a summer storm, big drops falling. Then, Nathaniel, who was standing beside her, stepped forward and said, "Don't cry anymore, stay with the little one during the time she has left." But Serafina, through the cage, stretched out her finger and stroked my head, saying firmly, "I don't believe it, there must be a way to extend her life. I'll ask again." With great effort, I lifted my head and rubbed against the finger Serafina was reaching towards me. The day we started back to the cemetery. It began to snow gently. Serafina put a soft and warm blanket in the cage for me. But I still felt like a deflated balloon. The cold seeped in from all around my body, making me shiver uncontrollably. She and Nathaniel took me in a car. Halfway there, Nathaniel leaned over and stroked me with his finger. "You're so lucky. This distance to the cemetery spans 2 cities. What a pity that Serafina and I have been looking for you everywhere, showing your photo. That tracker we put on you saved a lot of cats. But we didn't even see you." Serafina said bitterly. "All those who kill pets deserve to die." Nathaniel was looking out at the car window and sighed. "There's nothing we can do. The animal protection law hasn't been promulgated yet." I asked a lawyer friend. "It's hard to arrest them, the most they can do is fine them." Serafina also sighed and then said firmly, "I want to go back and consult other veterinarians." Nathaniel turned to Serafina, moved his lips, but finally said nothing. I was lying in the cage, drowsy and in fact, I soon fell asleep. After all this commotion, I've become more sleepy. The time I'm awake is intermittent. I even get tired just from eating. I don't even realize when I got back to the cemetery. When I woke up, I was already in Serafina's bedroom and she was busy looking for something on her phone. It was extremely difficult for me to get close and rub against her legs. She stroked my head. But her eyes didn't leave the phone for a moment. If only she would look at me a little more, seeing that she was so busy. I curled up beside her to be with her. After that, when I was awake from time to time, I noticed that Serafina was taking me to new hospitals. And those different strangers more or less said the same thing. It's the 3rd stage of renal insufficiency. She doesn't have much time left. At those moments, Serafina's hand on me trembled involuntarily. I don't remember in which pet hospital. Nathaniel and Serafina had the first argument that I can recall. Nathaniel pointed at me and asked, "You've seen many relatives yourself, don't you know what they regret the most in the end?" Serafina shouted with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't know. I don't know, I just want to give her more life. I don't care how much money I spend." The old watchman beside them, with a sad expression, tried to separate them. "Stop it, Serafina only has good intentions." I tried to get up from the cat bed to stop the argument, but finally I collapsed back onto the pillow due to weakness. Nathaniel was so angry that the veins on his forehead bulged, and he said bluntly, "Good intentions? I think you're selfish and just want to ease your conscience by paying." Serafina, furious, punched Nathaniel in the chest, making him step back several steps with a thud. She shouted, "Get out. I don't need you to give me advice from the sidelines. Get out." Hearing that, Nathaniel left with a serious face, not even looking back, and slammed the door shut. Hearing the door close, Serafina slumped to the ground as if she had lost all her strength. The old watchman sighed and left, and before closing the door, he said to Serafina, "Think about it again. Nathaniel doesn't choose his words carefully, but at least he's right that you should spend more time with Mimi." Serafina looked down at me, and her eyes welled up with tears again. I heard her say in a low voice, "I'm sorry. It's all my fault." That bitter and acidic feeling came back again. With all my might, I got up and lay down between Serafina's legs. "Don't worry, I'll be with you." After that argument, Serafina stopped taking me from one pet hospital to another. Whenever she wasn't working, she would sit beside me, gently stroke me, and brush my fur. I wanted to eat less and less. Even when they brought me the canned food I used to like the most, I had no appetite. Serafina could only look at me with red-rimmed eyes and feed me with a syringe. Little by little, I wanted to resist. The pain had spread throughout my body, and swallowing was a torment. But Serafina was extraordinarily patient and kept persuading me, "Eat a little more. Please." Her tears fell on my face, and I weakly lifted my head faced with her pleadings. I could only swallow the food while enduring the pain. But we both knew that moment wasn't far off, even though neither of us wanted it to come. Days later, in the early morning, I woke from a dream. The pain had less and abated, in some way. I felt a strength in my body. I got up easily. But at the same time I knew that my life was coming to an end. Nostalgically, I jumped onto Serafina's bed and gently licked her face while she slept. In these days, qu'est-ce. Because of taking care of me, she hadn't slept well. From time to time she would wake up startled and hurry to hug me. But today she was sleeping soundly, with a smile on her lips, surely dreaming a beautiful dream. My licking didn't wake her up. She made a gesture with her hand and murmured in her sleep, "Mimi, don't be angry." Seeing that she didn't wake up, I silently lamented. "It seems it's time." I got up and jumped out of the window. Following the wall of the dormitory building, I found a mass of flowers that were not very visible. "This is the place I've chosen for my end." The pain quickly returned, overwhelming me like a wave. Gasping, I closed my eyes as the raindrops falling from the sky hit my face. This is the first rain of spring and new green buds are sprouting on the ground. Before losing consciousness, the soft and constant sound of the rain took me back to my memory and I felt as if I had returned to the day I first met Serafina. On that cold and humid afternoon, she crouched down beside the bushes and saw me starving. But this time, she held out her hand to me with a smile and said, "Beautiful, come home with me." The faint aroma of jasmine surrounded me and I felt completely at peace. I happily replied to her, "Meow." Almost without hesitation, I started to follow her steps with a cheerful gait. Epilogue from Serafina's perspective. I was born as a girl that no one wanted. My biological parents wanted a son. To avoid family planning, they gave me my eldest uncle's surname, who couldn't have children. My uncle raised me until I was 5 years old. But just then, my aunt got pregnant with her own child. And my biological parents also managed to have a son as they wanted then. I became the niece. My biological parents naturally didn't want to take me back and my uncle had to reluctantly adopt me. But apart from feeding me and giving me something to drink, he didn't pay me any more attention. His only requirement for me was not to cause trouble. If I fought with the neighbors' children, my uncle would take a belt and whip me. He whipped me and shouted at me, "Troublemaker. Nothing good comes from raising someone like you." Even if sometimes it wasn't me who started the provocation. There were bruises on my body that didn't disappear for a month. Since I can remember, my uncle has never given me a kind look and my aunt ordered me to help with the housework. As a child, seeing my pampered sister, I thought my aunt was just being partial. Not until I graduated from primary school did I learn from rumors that I wasn't their biological daughter. After being mistreated once again, I went to seek comfort from my biological parents. But when they saw me at the door, they shut the door in my face without hesitation and said to me through the door, "Your name isn't in our household register. Go ask for money from those who raised you." I was left alone outside the door, more distressed than ever in front of the closed door. But I didn't want money, I just wanted a little love. With a complex state of mind, I entered the first year of secondary school and got into the biggest problem of my life. Since I didn't expect much from my family, I decided to make more friends. But I didn't imagine that in the first year of secondary school, a friend, to avoid a search at school, put the cigarettes she bought to look cool in my desk. And I didn't even notice as expected. The dean found the pack of cigarettes, and I became the bad student who was named and punished at the flag-raising ceremony. I asked my friend to clarify the truth. But she refused. "I don't want my parents to find out. They'll be furious with me," she said. I was left alone with that matter and decided in the depths of my heart to break up with her at that time. As innocent as I was, I didn't know what that meant. Betrayed by my friend, I became the target of my classmates. And things got out of control. I faced the discrimination of the teachers, the rejection of my classmates, and mockery everywhere. The malice of youth was neither hidden nor controlled. Missing books, papers with insults in the drawer, and an absent desk mate made up my whole world. After being locked in the bathroom once again and missing class, I couldn't take it anymore and went to the teacher. The teacher replied to me infuriately, "Why do they focus on you and not others? Isn't your behavior correct?" I can't forget his mocking eyes. Even when I've grown up. Then, without a low sigh, I stopped asking for outside help, learned to bear my negative emotions, and studied and grew up in silence. From time to time, I would look out of the window and wonder if life was always this lonely in childhood. Even when I entered high school, I didn't feel like making new friends. Establishing new relationships was so complicated. What if that person suddenly abandoned me? I was afraid of experiencing betrayal again. If possible, I'd rather not open my heart from the beginning. Feeding stray cats is a habit I developed in university. Many stray cats on the university campus were left behind by senior students when they graduated. They rub against me and flirt with me. The most important thing is that I see myself abandoned and them. They wait day after day in the same place, and after I feed them, they rub against me again and again to thank me. I can really feel their need for me just for a moment. But that's enough to console my heart. Just before I graduated, there was always a white cat waiting for me at the door of my university dormitory. My roommates encouraged me. If you like it, take it home. It's so sad that it always waits for you here. But in the end, I hardened my heart and left it on campus. There were many kind-hearted people on campus. So I didn't have to worry about its food. And a cat's life is so short for me. I couldn't face its early departure, so it was better to ignore it. My roommates jokingly said to me with resignation, "You're like a playboy who leaves after having sex." After being hired by a funeral company that matched my major, I managed to leave my original family behind. Therefore, I chose a cemetery very far from my home. Fortunately, the people here are very friendly, colleagues take care of each other, and the atmosphere is amicable. Besides the fact that the salary is as low as the industry average, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. In the third year after I graduated, during the annual vacation, I returned to my hometown, and my biological father came to my uncle's house with gifts. He said without the slightest remorse, "Serafina, come back and help us. Your mother became bedridden after a traffic accident last year." In his words, both he and his brother were men, and it was inconvenient for them to take care of a woman. Especially, his brother was studying at a university in another city, and he couldn't handle everything alone. This father, who only had a blood connection with me, asked me to quit my job and return to my hometown to help take care of a mother who had never raised me for a single day. I replied coldly, "I'm not someone registered in your family register. If you have any problems, you should look for your own relatives." My biological father stopped smiling and became brazen, shouting, "Ungrateful! Don't you understand that we gave you life?" That meeting ended badly that same night. I asked my uncle, "Do you think I should go back and take care of her?" My uncle was smoking a cigarette, and his expression was hard to see through the smoke. He said infuriately, "Help if you can. After all, your family." He seemed like a condescending saint for him. It was as easy as opening and closing his mouth. Maybe it would be better to have a united family. That same night, I left my uncle's house with my luggage. On the train back, while looking at the scenery outside the window, I suddenly thought that perhaps life was always so lonely. Death would be a liberation. How lucky those clients I served were, not realizing anything. And probably, no one would feel sad about my death. That was okay. After that, except during festivals, when I sent them some money as a token of gratitude for raising me, I didn't look for them again. In my heart, I had already separated from those disgusting people. I still had the habit of feeding stray cats. I always carried cat food and canned food in my bag. Finding Mimi was really magical. It was the first cat that came up to me, and I had only fed it once. The people at the cemetery loved Mimi. I thought that even if I didn't want it, someone else would give it a home. But it turned out to be nonsense. Not only was Nathaniel incompetent, but the gentleman also washed his hands off it. In the end, I had to be the one to feed it and clean its litter box. It gradually took over my life, like a seed taking root in the ground. But I always felt a fear deep in my heart. I had no family. Only the people at the cemetery were kind to me. What I had now was enough. I just had to keep it that way. That was the voice in my heart. I didn't expect that my biological father could find out my work address. This time, he didn't hide it and brutally demanded that I go back and take care of my biological mother. When that brute was about to hurt Mimi, there was only one voice in my head: he should die. Why does he have to ruin my life? But I, such a coward, only dared to stand in front of Mimi, not even daring to say an insulting word. In silence, I thought about finding an opportunity to remove my name from my uncle's family register. In recent years, I had saved enough money to pay the down payment for an apartment of over 30 square meters. The company provided me with accommodation, so I rented out the apartment, and it wasn't difficult to pay the mortgage with the rent. When I returned to my hometown, I told my uncle that I wanted to change my family register. My uncle didn't care much, so he didn't mind me taking my family register. only saying that I should return the money he had spent on raising me. But my biological father got alarmed and said to my uncle, "Don't be deceived. When she gets married, there will be a dowry." My uncle raised an eyebrow, and his gaze turned greedy. Finally, having fulfilled my upset, I had to promise to hand over all the dowry when I got married for my uncle to agree. But I had no plans to get married. How could I have the courage to get married if I was afraid of establishing new relationships? It was just a promise to get rid of them. When I rescued Mimi from a private slaughterhouse, I almost lost my mind. My hands were covered in its blood, and I rushed it to the veterinary clinic. While the vet was treating its wounds and I was looking at its sleeping body, I made a wish in my heart. If it recovered, it would be my family in the future. During the hours when the operating room light was on, I felt as if my heart was on fire. Fortunately, after receiving a blood transfusion, Mimi was out of danger. I had just breathed a sigh of relief when the veterinarian told me that Mimi had chronic renal insufficiency. And she had had it for a long time. Now she was already in the third stage. In an instant, I was overwhelmed by remorse. As if I were drowning in the sea. I couldn't speak. And it was hard for me to breathe. If I had accepted Mimi earlier, would I have discovered her illness earlier? Could I have saved her? Animal blood transfusions are very expensive. I had to spend 3 months' salary to pay the bill. But as I held Mimi, weak and tired, I was still thinking about selling my only apartment to treat her illness. Although the veterinarian had given her a fatal diagnosis, I believed that there was always a way to save her. At that time, I was so naive that I believed that persistence would bring a miracle. But more and more veterinarians told me that it was irreversible. That Mimi didn't have much time left. When Nathaniel accused me of only doing all this to satisfy my selfishness, I had a moment of doubt. I couldn't deny that I had that thought. If I could prolong Mimi's life, I would have the opportunity to make up for my past mistakes. But I also had to admit that the constant examinations and treatments would make Mimi suffer more. Most families said they regretted not having spent more time with their deceased loved ones. At that time, I looked at them infuriately as they knelt at the wake to mourn. But when it was my turn, I couldn't do any better. I couldn't stay optimistic in the face of death. The fear of losing Mimi was driving me crazy. I should thank Nathaniel for setting me straight. In the following days, I tried to be with Mimi as much as possible, so that every time she woke up, she could see me. When she rubbed her head against my legs, I felt as if my heart was being cut with a knife. I cherished the remaining time even more, even though it was so little. Mimi left one night in early spring, alone in a flower pot in a corner of the cemetery. When I woke up and saw the empty room, I was so startled that I completely lost my sleep. I searched all over the cemetery and finally found Mimi lying quietly on the grass, as if he was asleep. Although I was mentally prepared, I still felt a tightness in my chest. I think at that moment, I could finally understand how the families of the deceased feel. When we buried Mimi, everyone in the cemetery gathered. We dug a hole on the slope of the cemetery and put Mimi together with her favorite canned food. Everyone had a sad expression and started filling the hole with soil, using shovels. I too, with an impassive expression, continued to dig with the shovel, hoping that the work would help me forget the pain. After Mimi left, I often stared blankly at the courtyard. When the wind blew my clothes, I would automatically reach out my hand and say, "Mimi, don't bother." But when I came to my senses, I realized that the courtyard was so quiet that it was terrifying. Suddenly, the scene in front of me became blurred. I had to clench my teeth to keep from crying out. Everyone, as if they had agreed, avoided mentioning Mimi in front of me. Even Nathaniel, who used to talk nonstop, avoided topics related to Mimi. Of course, they did it with good intentions, but I felt trapped in a web of memories. And my nostalgia had no one to confide in. My biological father came to the cemetery to look for me again. His only goal was to get the dowry money he had asked me for, so he had gone to see the suitors in advance. This time he had come to take me back and sell me in front of him. I said coldly, "Do you want this money?" "Not in your dreams." My father got angry and wanted to hit me, shouting that he would sue me for not supporting my parents. I smiled coldly and said, "If you want to hit me, go ahead. I don't mind going to the police and talking about how you abandoned me that year." My father turned red with anger. But finally he didn't hit me. He said to me angrily, "You don't take care of your parents, Just wait for the curse of heaven to fall on you. I pretended not to hear and replied, Parents? What evidence do you have? Do you just say it and it's true? Sir, don't go around recognizing anyone as your daughter. After saying that, I walked away without looking back towards the cemetery. I thank my boss for recently hiring 2 new guards. They were tall and strong and stood at the entrance of the cemetery. They really scared my father. After my father stopped coming to look for me, my life returned to normal, but I always felt that something was missing. Like the noise and bustle. The year after Mimi left, I took responsibility for sterilizing most of the stray cats in the neighborhood. Most of the cats were impatient and complained when we returned them. I got familiar with the places where they appeared and fed them regularly. The day I met the calico cat, she was hiding, small and thin. She was an unknown cat. When all the other cats left after eating, only she followed me and didn't want to leave. She kept meowing behind me non-stop. Her clear, amber-like eyes seemed familiar to me. My heart skipped a beat, and I asked her in a low voice, Mimi? The calico cat licked her lips and replied with a meow. I got up hesitantly and walked a little further. I didn't expect the calico cat to follow me, still meowing. This time, I didn't hesitate any longer. I bent down, picked her up and said, Come on, come home with me. End of text.